What's up with gadgets?
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer, and with me is my co-host, Deborah Romero, certified Alexander Technique instructor. And today's topic is about bands. Bands like rubber
Gadgets,
bands,
vans.
horse gadgets. Yeah. So, like a really trendy new gadget for riders and horses are these elastic type bands.
Hmm.
And there's a certain value to these bands because I even designed and used to have made
I remember I
something,
still have them.
yeah, the balance bands.
Your balance bands, I
Yeah,
still
and I
have them.
think I think I still have new ones sitting around, but I took them out. I took them off the market for sale, but they were like the elastic on those bands was kind of like the elastic in your pajama pants. It's super stretchy, like isn't going to contain or do anything. And it was doubled up on the bands that went from basically the saddle. You hooked up one end to the stirrup bars on a saddle
Hmm.
and then ran those separately either side of the saddle to the halter or the bridle. And then there was one long band that connected from the D-ring on the saddle behind the hind legs to the other D-ring. But it was so stretchy. It was like, I don't know if it's going to do anything. And horses responded to them really well. And I quit having them made because production was too expensive and, getting all the materials was expensive. I was paying people to put them together because I can't sew. And
Right? Neither can I.
and they didn't look like much, but the price was kind of high. So I'm like, oh, this just doesn't seem like you're getting a lot of value to get these stretchy little nothing elastic bands. And but they did work. And the
What do
reason
you mean they work? Yeah, tell me why
the
they work.
horses responded, it was kind of like when we have a contact as a rider, and that's what I
Mm,
was trying to simulate. Like the most gentle resistance possible, but mostly a constant contact or constant touch from the stability of the saddle. So they were attached to a saddle. It didn't work as well on a surcingle, but it would kind of work. But it worked best with the saddle. So the two bands from the saddle to the head were like perfectly timed, stretchy rain contacts.
right.
And then the band that went behind the hind legs was kind of simulating a leg contact. So what the horses would do, it worked proprioceptively. So it didn't
I think
really,
that's the most important word.
yeah. So what does that
Mm.
mean, proprioceptive?
It just brings an awareness to the situation. And what I've done with people, because I know there's new bands out there for people, and they're calling them helps with your proprioception. You can help with your proprioception if you want to get aware. Is I sometimes will have people just tie a band around their waist, and just that new tactile touch
Yeah,
for a period of time. Of course, eventually you get used to it if you do it all the time.
right. That's
But
why these gadgets don't work.
yeah,
Yeah.
because you become a slave to them. It's kind of like I have a very strange relationship with these support belts, lumbar support
Yes.
belts.
What do you mean a strange relationship?
Well, I uh, I understand their purpose for when somebody hurts themselves.
So that they
That
don't accidentally strain.
right. But do we continue to wear them so that we cannot use ourselves well and pick up things poorly with support?
Ah,
Yeah,
yeah, because
that's what I see.
it's always a dual-edged sword,
Yep.
always. And what I found was these bands. I use them. I originally kind of came up with the design trying to create a step, the last step between groundwork and riding a green horse, or a step that would kind of encourage balance in horses that couldn't be ridden yet for whatever reason.
Hmm.
And anything that's new or different
Exactly.
brings our perception
Hmm.
to where the touch is new or different. That's what proprioceptive changes are. And so it just gets us to pay attention.
Exactly. It's like put on somebody else's shoes.
Right. Or
You
put on
have
shoes you haven't worn for a long time.
right. All
Yeah.
of a sudden it's like, whoa, okay.
Or
I
new
didn't realize.
shoes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or go shoe shopping.
Yeah.
It's that newness of information. It would be um riding in a new saddle or riding somebody else's horse or all of those
Right.
things brings it's kind of like my new guy Milo has me really questioning my position in relationship to what's going on with him. So it's all that newness
Right. So
that
you have a more alertness or
yes.
awareness
Hmm.
when you have something that's new and different physically touching because it just
Exactly.
keeps pulling your attention there.
Yeah, it does.
Right.
Until it becomes not
Until
new
it gets
anymore.
normalized. And
Exactly.
brains normalize things very quickly. So it can become a crutch, a handicap, or it can just quit working the way
Hmm.
it's supposed to work as soon as the brain normalizes that new sensation.
And like we say in the Alexander community, if you have poor posture, you're still going to have poor posture with support.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Until you address the subconscious use or your thinking of how you use yourself, you will not, no device is going to help from my
Yeah. And
perspective.
I found it really interesting that the less resistance the elastic created, the stretchier it was, which I
Hmm.
had to shop around to find the right consistency.
Tension.
But it's like pajama stretchy, like,
Yeah.
sweatpants stretchy,
I
that kind of
ordered some new
stretchy.
ones that are out on the market. I'm gonna play with them and I'll report back.
Are they that stretchy?
They look like it in the video.
But maybe, maybe not.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And
Because if they're
you
more
just
the
don't know.
quality like a bungee cord, then that's enough resistance that the body can adapt, will adapt to the resistance, but not necessarily in the way we're hoping.
That's the exact point. Are we
Yeah.
creating contact or are we creating an aid?
Right.
Right. And that's like those some of those systems out there are very locking, not allowing for experimentation for the horse to find self-carriage, I think.
Right. So the elastic I used on the balance bands, if 10 is like a strong bungee cord and one is a loose rubber band, the stretchy factor was maybe a 3. Like it was maybe a
Hmm.
2 or a 3. So horses could stretch their neck all the way down to the ground without getting a lot of resistance in the mouth. They could buck, bolt, rear, act out, do whatever they wanted, but it was that constant touching, no matter how they moved, that seemed to be effective.
Just to be aware. It's an awareness. It's kind of like me putting hands on somebody.
Yeah.
I have much more body intelligence at that point because I can feel what's going on than just
Yes.
by physically watching,
And
you know.
that's where I saw horses really improve their coordination using the bands, not because the bands restricted or even
Mhm.
resisted very much in any way. It was just that constant touch.
It's an exploration.
But
Yeah,
I also, that what you're saying about normalizing something new is also why that tool worked best if it wasn't used more than once a week.
good point.
It was
Yeah.
like once a week. let them explore this or do it a couple of times and then
Hmm.
let it sit for a while. And I think just because the whole production factor was a bit much, I'm like, well, the long reins on a circle act very similarly, and I can adjust the feel live.
You can
So
do it, the timing and feel as much if once you get the art of it down.
So in other words, the stretchiness comes through what I do.
Right.
The
The
long reins
allowing. Hmm.
themselves don't stretch at all, but I can change the amount of resistance all the time by how I use them.
Yeah.
So I went, I kind of let the balance bands go, but they did work really well when people were trying them and using them. And if you didn't overuse them, um, then they kept horses continually exploring their coordination. And I could even use them while people were riding. They were pretty safe to use while you're
Hmm.
riding because they didn't create any restriction at all.
Right.
So, but a lot of the stuff I see, like, there's been a popular item I kept coming across for a while called the German neck stretcher. And and I'm like, what
That sounds
is that?
horrible.
And it's basically draw reins made out of bungee cords that are fixed. And I went, so the horse has to pull these super strong bungee
Wow.
cords in order to lengthen the neck. And I'm like, okay. So horses that push on the bit or lean on the reins, I go, it works pretty well, I guess, because they can take that resistance. But horses that tend to overcurl the neck and get behind the bit,
Behind the bit.
I go,
Right.
that's not going to work so well. They're going to
They're just going to
feel
go to their habit.
right,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah, and it's interesting that after whatever length of time we normalize the newness. It's kind of like your habits. We talk about the habitual use. It's normalized, even though it might not be the best use, we normalize it
right. So there's
until we have a
also
problem.
something going around Facebook or going around the horse business that if your horse is crooked, putting one bell boot on one hind leg will help them straighten up. And I go, well,
Could?
you could because it would
Why not?
work proprioceptively.
Exactly. It's new.
It's new.
So there's a tension to that.
There's a feel on the foot. So you put the
Right.
bell boot on the hind leg that tends to be underused, which goes hand in hand with horses being crooked. One hind leg takes a longer stride than the other. One leg is more tight and restricted than the other. So you put the bell boot on the tighter or the more restricted leg, and they start to increase kind of the range of motion. And I went, well, people swore by it and said it would work, but
Really.
then I see how it can work. Like it just
Hmm.
brings the horse's attention to that hind leg. And I said, but if you're not really addressing the root cause, you can't ride with it for maybe more than a week or two before the horse is just going to consider it normal
Hmm.
and the coordination adjusts back to the default setting.
Usually, yeah, unless, you're seeing an Alexander teacher or something.
Or actively helping the horse change coordination
That's a good way to put it. Hmm.
if you are also doing things that help restore the function of that restricted hind leg, then, a bell boot on that same hind foot might help the horse keep the attention focused there during a
Right.
training session or something. But somebody asked me about that and then polo wrapping, and I said, no, polo wrapping is dynamic. You're actually, or sports medicine boots, especially the ones with fetlock support. I go, no, you're actually mimicking what the fascia in the leg should be doing, sort of holding the tendons and ligaments from overstretching. And if you have fetlock support, there's an active resistance to the fetlock dropping downward, which can put too much strain on the
Right. And
tendons and
on this.
ligaments.
Hmm.
And I said, that is a dynamic restriction of too much mobility through the lower tendons and ligaments or joints of the leg. That's dynamic. That
Yeah.
will always work the same way.
And that, like you said, the people and horses that are hypermobile are harder to work with
Yeah, they can
because of
be
that,
because of the mobility.
because there's too much availability of stretch.
Right. And the proprioceptive part of like putting polo wraps or boots on a horse for the first time, especially the hind legs,
Mhm.
is they pick up their hind legs really high for like the first day or the first
Mhm.
few minutes. And then all of a sudden the brain goes, okay, I can still
I
move.
can I can move. I'm okay. Let's move.
And that's how fast proprioception can change.
I
Even,
agree. That's a good example.
yeah, that all of a
Yeah.
sudden they take some wonky steps and bend their legs a lot and then they just walk
Hmm.
normally. That's how fast proprioception can suddenly be like that new
They
thing is
normalize it
normalized.
that quick.
Yeah, so I go, if you're spending a ton of money on these bands, they might only work for a day or two.
Hmm.
I go, I don't know. And also, if there's too much resistance, which too much is a little bit subjective to individual people and horses, but like taking your hypermobile horse example,
Hmm.
they are a classic. If you restrict them left to right, they just bend downward. If you restrict them from bending downward, they pop out left and right. I go, so there's always a way to
Escape.
contort the body in
Hmm.
dysfunction in order to escape pressure or find relief from resistance. But that does not mean that that change of coordination is any better than what you're trying to remedy. I go, because
Yeah,
there's no way it's going to be correct because correct is so complicated. It's
it's in
incredibly
a moment
complicated.
of wispness.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, there it went. Oh, there it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
we
like you
think
can't strap a person to a bike until they figure out how to balance on a bike. Do you know what I mean? But that's what we do with horses. We go, if we just strap them in place, they'll figure out the coordination. And I go, usually they're just looking for, relief from pressure.
that's
A-
true. We forget that that's our communication, really.
Is pressure and release.
It's pressure and
Yeah.
release, at
Or
least in our world.
resistance. Yeah, that is kind of the communication with a horse, is its physical type, either contact, which always cracks me up. Like when we take a rein contact,
Oh, I hate that word.
I go, some of these terms we use with
I know.
horses,
We got to
like,
do a whole podcast on changing the language.
well, contact literally means touch without resistance,
Hmm.
right? So a rein contact is a touch without resistance. But when we take a rein contact, the first thing we think of with short reins is we have to resist our horse. And I go, well, then that would be a rein aid.
I totally agree.
Because in order to change something, in order to facilitate a change or give an aid, we're either increasing or decreasing resistance or resistant forces.
Right.
But I go, a contact is a neutral touch. An aid is a change in resistance. So I go, arraign contact. I go, the definition's in the word. Like,
It's true.
just like self-carriage. I go, as long
Mhm.
as you're giving a gazillion aids and using leverage, how is self-carriage possible?
I
Like,
I completely and people I think people it's that 30, 60, 90 day rule, or I need to have this accomplished by this horse show.
yeah,
So I'm going to use whatever device I think
it's
is
going to get me there
is
faster.
going to get me there faster,
Yeah,
and that's what's breaking down people and horses.
absolutely.
Yeah. It's
Absolutely. Because the body will, like, the body just has a natural pain response. I go, it's not even conscious. It's like we just automatically recoil from something that has enough resistance that it's getting uncomfortable or painful.
Hmm.
I go, but that doesn't mean we're gonna find a better use. It means we're just gonna find a way
Hmm.
away from the discomfort or the pain. That's it.
Right.
That's what
And
the
that
body's
sends
gonna
up
do.
a whole set of other problems when we start compensating from pain.
Oh
Or,
yeah. And
and it might
horses,
not even be pain yet, just a restriction, just
yeah,
yeah, a restriction from like a device.
right. That I want to do this, but I'm restricted from it. So how could I rearrange to
Mhm.
find comfort right now?
Exactly.
And it's a moment to moment thing. So the comfort right now might just create another layer of dysfunctional coordination that,
Exactly. And we can think of it in ourselves. I mean, twisted an ankle. We're going to set up a compensatory pattern. And what we don't realize is that that pattern stays in us unless we seek an Alexander teacher or maybe a little bit of PT. PT gets you halfway there. Then you need to add something like the Alexander technique to really get to the nitty gritty of movement
yeah,
correction, because the body's really quick at being able, like we said, proprioceptively to change circuitry
yeah,
in a good or a bad way.
yeah,
It can go either direction.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, is that what you mean? Like in your example of twisting an ankle, if we wrap it or brace it, but we're still compensating to avoid using it, even
Yeah.
if it's wrapped and supported. And then when we take the wrap or the support off, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be restored to healthy function or ideal function. We may still walk as if the brace is on.
And the interesting thing, there's this new research coming up from alexandertechniquescience.com with Tim Cacciatore on the psychology of pain.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so this is all new information that is being shared in the last 2 years about, because when you've twisted an ankle, that you go to the doctor and the doctor says it's healed, you still question
If you
that
can use
ankle.
it,
Yeah,
yes, you still protect it.
you still protect it.
Yeah.
So there's this whole new research about the psychology of pain and, as Alexander teaches, how we can help people with that part of healing.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this before, but pain and fear are such deep instinctual emotions that, or experiences, that it's a visceral, which means outside of the brain. It happens in the peripheral nervous system, not in the central nervous system. And what happens is then, especially with pain, it's like our fingers know we touched a hot stove before our brain knows, right? So as soon as our fingers know that's painful, our body recoils from the hot stove before we go, oh, the stove was on.
Right.
Oh, my stupid so and so left the stove on, right? And it's like, but or even though I'm not afraid of snakes, when one is suddenly crossing my path and I catch it out of the corner of my eye, peripheral vision, right?
Hmm.
I jump and I go, oh, it's a good snake, right? Not a bad snake. But
Right.
it's like that jump response or startle response happens. And
That's primal.
then,
It's just
yeah,
primal.
it is. And so
Mhm.
I
It's
think
primal.
because it happens in the peripheral nervous system first, like the body intelligence we talked about, that's what then sends the information to the central nervous system and trains the brain to avoid anything that even smells like that situation. So after we've twisted an ankle and experienced the pain of it, even though the doctor tells us we're healed, our nervous system says avoid weight there.
We still
We
have to re-circuitry, do the reboot
right.
of
Because
that
the brain,
neurological pathway.
right, the brain is already conditioned to say, if I put weight on that ankle, it will hurt. So
Hmm.
avoid using the ankle, avoid loading the ankle, avoid steps that might twist the ankle again, right?
I'm still in constant rehab with another Alexander teacher. I think it was 3.5 years ago. Both of my feet were crushed by a horse,
Oh, right.
and I still have not so great gait performance walking. I still have to have somebody looking at that at me saying, "Hey, Deb, that's gone. We're done with that
Yeah.
3.5 years ago." So it takes a while, if not
Yeah.
forever, to really be paying attention.
But when we have a pain issue like that, where it requires surgery or medical intervention, I think that sends the type of pain signal to the brain that really puts it at the top of the list of things to avoid.
I'll dig
Like,
into the research about that. Maybe we can pull somebody from that team to do a podcast with us on that. That might be fun.
oh, yeah, that would be very
I'll dig
interesting.
into that a little deeper to see if one of the on the research team would be able to do that.
Oh, that would be cool.
Okay. Yeah.
So back to our training gadgets. But I think that whole sidetrack into pain or fear works the same way,
Hmm.
right? That's why we can do less and less with our horse once we cross a stress threshold from sort of worried or uncertain into fear. It takes a long time to come back from that. And we've now trained the brain to keep avoiding any situation that resembles those circumstances. And so people can,
Right.
get out of riding because they just start to have more fear than fun.
Mm.
So, but again, that's the peripheral nervous system training the brain, and it takes conscious effort to turn that around.
Getting back, pulling that into the gadgets, are we telling the horse you can't do this yourself? That's what it sounds like to me. You can't find self-carriage. I have to. I mean, there's a type of support we use by the long lining, which, I've even got, I think I sent you those tracings of the horse I worked with, his saddle tracings a year and a half apart.
Hmm.
Big changes,
Huge
huge
changes.
changes in his width and balance and symmetry left, right. Um, but you can't lock them into a path. We
Hmm.
have to let them explore,
Yes.
falling just like a kid learning to walk, actually. You can't
Yes.
say to the kid, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful. Then the kid's not going to go anywhere, you know?
Right. Or we use support for kids like those little chairs where they're not walking yet, but there's those little chairs that they sit inside of that have wheels and
Right.
they can
Training wheels.
yeah, they can kind of use their feet to move around a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Um, and that to me is whether I'm using a gadget or I'm using long reins, a tool, or I'm just using aids and weight shifts when I'm riding,
Oh, that's huge.
it's kind of acting like that little chair for a baby learning to walk. I go, okay, we'll give a little support here, but if you keep that kid in that chair all the time, they never learn to walk because
Right.
we're not born with wheels. So it's a different experience to actually balance yourself when you're walking than it is to scooch around in one of those little toddler toys.
Right.
And I think if we look at these different bands, whether it's for a rider or a horse, number one, the less restriction and resistance, the better.
I agree with that.
I go, the
Hmm.
tighter and more conforming it is, the more likely you're going to just create another layer of dysfunctional use rather than the balance that you're seeking.
I agree. Yeah,
So I think
especially with like the lumbar supports I see, or what is that new thing I've
the
seen
shoulders
right?
back. Yeah,
If you don't get the spinal integrity, as soon as you take those off, it's gone.
right. And the idea behind it is that if you use a gadget to put your body in that position, then the right muscles will develop to take the gadget off. But in
Hmm.
practical
Yeah,
terms,
let's talk practical terms.
I've never seen a person take off the support gadget and be able to hold the changes. I've never, on a practical level, seen horses trained in side reins taking the side reins off and having them move the same way.
And
I,
it's
I,
just like putting
I
a boot on when you sprain your ankle. When you create that inability to educate movement, there is no movement.
there is no movement. Yeah.
It's that simple. There
So
is no
instead of
movement.
strengthening the muscles, it can
Mhm.
actually create a constant contraction of the muscle, trying to facilitate immobility rather than mobility.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And unless you've got a sprain where you've had like an evulsion fracture, which is you've actually torn a piece of bone off the tendon.
right,
If I twist my ankle or anything, I do not, usually the body will create stillness because of the pain.
right, right.
The body's kind of intelligent that way.
But
It's like,
you're having to be more aware. That's the
yes.
thing. I think when we use gadgets, it's like mental laziness.
Oh, I like that. I
Whether
like that
it's,
connection.
yeah, whether it's like for horse
That's a good way to
training.
put it.
And I had a new client who sent me this fantastic text update. And we worked on for the, I worked with her just once, and her horse really has some significant balance issues under saddle, well, across the board. So being ridden is tricky. But this rider did a fantastic job with just getting control over her weight distribution. And I
That's
said,
huge.
keep the work simple, but this will make the biggest difference. And her horse responded instantly because we're talking physics. It's going to work. And she texted me and said, she goes, this is incredibly mentally taxing.
That's what I hear all the time about
I know.
Alexander work.
And
It's
I
just like
said,
too much brain function going
yeah,
on.
she goes, I really have to concentrate to the point that I'm tired, but it's really working. And I said, yep, it is mentally taxing. Physically, it's not that hard to do. But because balance requires a constant readjustment during
It's not a
motion,
place. It's
it's
not a
it's not
place.
a posture, it's not
Not a
a
place.
position. Yeah, and I think that's why I always gravitated away from gadgets, whether it was for me. Like if you break a bone or like you say an avulsion fracture, when bone is mending, right, or tendons are healing from a tear,
Mhm.
I go, okay, that immobility that allows the cellular process of
The
healing,
cellular, and that's like
the
10
cellular
days.
process,
That's
right?
like 10 days to 2 weeks.
Right.
If it's going to heal, it's going to heal enough to start. If you don't, so all the new studies out for us older people about maintaining bone mass is jumping.
Oh,
Put actual compression into the joints.
oh, on a
So
does a trampoline count? Because
eh,
that would be fun.
I have a trampoline. I have a mini trampoline in my basement that I
I want
use,
a
but
big trampoline.
they want you to implode the ground.
Well, and
So
that's why just walking and staying active as we
exactly.
age is part of what keeps our bone density good
Hmm.
because it's movement and actually the force of gravity that keeps our bones strong.
Exactly. And the same thing with ligaments and everything else. So Yeah, and then what happens when we use a gadget and those ligaments and soft tissue is not being allowed to express itself properly.
or have a relationship with gravity that's constantly changing.
That's appropriate.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that's where balance comes in.
right,
If your spinal integrity is not healthy, I think I've used this example before, is the person with a walker. They're balancing off their arms and legs because they have no spinal integrity. And
right.
if we're not allowing that, if we're using a gadget to get a frame that we want, what has happened to the spinal integrity of the horse?
Right. No, and I have one rider I work with regularly who had rods put in her back
Yeah,
surgically, right? And it was like she wasn't aware anymore of that part of her body where the rods
that's,
were
I bet.
because it's like, oh, the rods do the work now. I don't have
It's
to
the
be
thought,
aware,
right?
right? And just waking up her sensation around that area of her back was we had to be kind of creative. But what was so
Mhm.
fascinating is with the rods in place, she could still change her coordination. And she found the muscles around the rods were very weak. She had very little control over them. And instead of them being strong, being the rods, right? Because the rods were there and the way her perception worked with it, the muscles had really atrophied around that part of her spine.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so it was very fatiguing to start
Mhm.
her, kind of gaining some self-control over that area of her body, but it was entirely possible, which
Right,
I found fascinating. I go, the rods weren't getting in the way,
right.
but
It's the
they,
changing of your thinking, and that's pretty much what my work is. You can't change the movement until you change the thought.
mm. Yeah, and that's what I've always called, like in my work, I go, it's a big ass paradigm shift more than anything else. I go, a balanced horse and a balanced rider all look the same as the end result. But how you get there, how we change our thinking in order to get there is
Exactly.
kind of what's so different about putting balance as the priority of training
Mhm.
instead of sort of hoping our gadgets and our maneuvers are going to somehow result in the side effect of balance.
I think what you said is so important. It's a paradigm shift that has to happen in the human.
Yeah, horses are right there. Like,
They're adaptable.
hmm
They're much more adaptable than we are to something new.
Yeah, and even like this same writer who had texted me and told me how mentally tiring the work was, it's like her horse, who is 20 or just over 20, is already looking younger
Mhm.
because it works. Balance is so dynamic and so healing to the body.
Exactly.
And this is a off the track thoroughbred with years of recurring problems and issues, and then had to have a surgery to remove one eye. So was
Wow.
also now having to relearn how to do everything with one eye missing. It was completely removed. And so I go, that is not an easy situation.
Mm-mm.
And I got to give credit to this writer. Like I feed her with a shovel when I'm giving her information. And she takes it and runs with it and figures it out and applies it. And the next time I see her, her and her horse have just advanced by leaps
That
and
is
bounds.
that's beauty right there. That's just I love
Yeah.
that. And I hate to see it when we use some sort of gadget and we develop another problem.
Well, some of the hardest horses to rehab, I gotta say, the hardest horses are the ones that have had the most time with professional trainers.
Sorry.
Because professional trainers, if nothing else, are effective at what they do,
Good point.
right? So if you're effective, but you're not recognizing dysfunction, stress, problems in coordination, then you effectively get the change that makes the owner happy. But what happens to the horse is it builds layers,
Layers of
layers of
dysfunction.
dysfunction. So
Layers.
it's not a simple matter of getting the horse straight. It's like you're having to unwind things
Mhm.
one puzzle piece at a time, or you're putting the horse back in balance like it's a 1,000 piece puzzle
It
instead of a
is.
100 piece puzzle.
I feel blessed. Like I said, I've got this new 8-year-old that hasn't had much done with him.
Hmm.
So he doesn't have layers of that type of training. He's got dysfunction in his body,
Hmm.
but not a bunch of that stuff you're talking about piled on him.
Or one horse I've worked with for years had an undiagnosed, unknown physical issue that was causing pain in the stifles,
Wow.
right? An OCD lesion on both stifles, which I forget what OCD stands for, osteocondystope something. But anyways, what it is when horses grow really fast, and he was a big horse as a 3-year-old. And when horses grow really fast, you can get a tear in the cartilage inside of a joint.
Wow.
And that tear means the cartilage moves. It can create a little
It's not
flap or
stable.
it can create space. And so what happens is you get intermittent bone on bone pain. Like you don't, the horse doesn't know when it's going to happen, but when it does happen, it's
It's
incredibly,
excruciating.
incredibly painful, right? And so this horse had only had 90 days of professional training. And it has taken a decade to unwind all the compensation patterns he developed with a pain issue in 90 days. And there were other complications, but I just went, his body adapted so fast and so hard because that level of pain, right?
Right.
That he could push through all kinds of pressure. He could take in, there was nothing you could do to him that was more painful than how he felt inside his own skin.
Right.
So the resistance level was phenomenal. And like just treating him like he was a butterfly instead of a rock started to turn everything around. And it was like being delicate with him made it safe for him to start unwinding that really
And I
strong
think
pattern.
that is so important. What we don't realize when we use a gadget, it's a restriction of some sort.
It's a
Even if
control device.
it's a control, and we're taking away the what I've seen in the horse that I've been working with for 2 years is he thinks while he's being ridden. Or
Yeah.
when, yeah,
Hello.
he's a thinking creature and he realizes
Yes.
when he's using himself poorly. He's kind of like had Alexander work for 2 years now.
Yeah.
So he can self-regulate,
Yes.
which I think we talked about this
If you
before.
can't self-regulate, you won't get to self-carriage.
Exactly. So
Hmm.
I see him playing with going down a hill. I see him thinking about that. And if I had put some sort of gadget on him and not let him fall on his face a couple of times,
Yeah,
he wouldn't have cared. He would have just kept going down that pathway.
right.
But he's a self-thinking horse now.
Well, and that's just it. When we're looking for gadgets, whether it's for ourselves or for the horse, it's because of all the extra energy it takes. That's why I said it's mental
Oh yeah.
laziness.
That's why in Alexander school some days I'd curl up in a corner with a blankie and say, "Leave me alone."
And that brings up another point. Somebody in our group meeting the other day read this quote that was just fantastic. I think from the guy who rode Hidalgo or something like that. But he said something about learning from horses that it's all a matter of trust. It's not a matter of control. And I think when we start looking for gadgets that change our body without consciously making those changes ourselves,
Mhm.
I think we don't believe we can do it. Like we don't trust.
Well, the central nervous system doesn't believe you can do it.
Right. Or we don't trust ourselves to be able to figure it out. So we want a gadget to make us do it or show us how to do it to ourselves. And then we just apply that same way of thinking to the horse. Like a lot of people with old horses, lame horses, dangerous horses, they can't even imagine that this horse could change to the point of being sound, being safe, that you would, that they're going to desire to ride this horse that is currently standing on his hind legs all the time, right? And I go, but when we do work with conscious awareness in the horse, right, as well as people, the changes are slower, more subtle, softer, and allows room for it to sort of be organic to that
It's organic and
individual.
the
Yeah,
expression you can see, like you said, with this horse, he looks younger than he is. And I see the same thing with people. All the wrinkles start to go away on their face
I know. I need
because
you to come visit me soon.
because the body's not as stressed.
Yeah,
It it's written all over people's faces.
yes. Or in their posture or in the
Yeah.
use. Yeah,
And the holding of it all, the holding patterns
yeah.
that we create. Yeah. And the same thing when we use gadgets on horses, the holding patterns. And I just can't imagine what that does to because the body's all connected. It's affecting the entire system.
Right. So if the central nervous system is sending up the red flags for pain or fear, I go, no gadget is going to override that.
Nothing takes care of that except
Yeah.
time and good training.
Yeah. And so if we have a horse that's in stress and we're applying these gadgets, like the stuff that works proprioceptively, I go, no harm, no foul.
I
Right.
agree for us that works for a short period of time for people and horses. I agree with that.
Right. And I had multiple clients. I even had one person give me a set of these stupid foam things that you put the horse's feet on. It's just a piece of
That's a
foam,
big thing here.
right? And it appears to work miraculously. And I go, well, if you don't use it too often, all it's doing is putting the horses on unstable footing. And so they have to rethink their
They got
normal
to rethink.
coordination.
Hmm.
And I go, so that's an example of it working proprioceptively,
Exactly. But
right? Whether
it's
it's
not an
worth the
everyday
money or
thing.
not is a
I know.
different
There you go.
question. No, and that's why the balance bands, even I just kind of gave up on having them manufactured because I was like, they're not it's not even a tool. Like the price has to reflect the fact that it's only going to work a little, like it's only going to work proprioceptively, which means intermittently you put them in and out of the tack room a lot,
Yep.
or it's only going to work for a certain stage of development and then you're not going to use them anymore. And so I go, the price has to kind of reflect that type of value. So even using stockings or
It
stretchy
doesn't matter.
stretchy bands, I go,
Or playing a game. I play a game with people sometimes. I say, close your eyes and we're going to play with rain contact. And I'll put an apple in their hand.
that's unexpected. Yeah,
Yeah. And they're like, what? That wasn't the conversation.
right.
But it's that adaptability of our thought as to what we think it should be.
Or what we think it should feel like,
Right.
right? So when
Or
we
look
use a
like or feel like.
gadget,
Yeah.
sometimes we can create a pattern, even though the gadget itself didn't lead to balance and created some other type of dysfunction instead of fixing the problem, right? Horses and people can now seek the same feeling when the gadget is removed
I totally agree with that.
because it will train the nervous system. You just
Hmm.
don't know to what.
Which way? Yeah.
Right,
Where is it going with
right.
that?
Which way is it going? How's that working? Right. So it's so interesting. I just am like, gadgetless. I go, save your money, spend the time.
Spend
But
the time
but I
and the
think that
thought.
in the quick fix sort of mentality, the biggest complaint I get is it takes too much mental energy or it takes too
Mhm.
long. And
I've
I,
had some people not come back to me because of that. They don't want to do the work.
yeah. And I go, fair enough.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. And the gadget will maybe get you farther down the road. But you and I know the more we've learned about body mechanics, nervous
Bodies.
systems,
Hmm.
horse and human bodies, it's not ultimately going to get us where we think we want to go.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. But that quick fix mentality is,
It's so ingrained in us Americans. Well, yeah, across the horse world, I think, especially the competitive horse world.
well, I was thinking about that the other day, and I go hundreds of years ago, most of the classical horse training texts were written, maybe between the 1600s and 1900s, right? That's when most of our classical horse training literature was put together. I go, so what was going on before that? Like we were still riding horses. But I go, even from then to now, our sources of information have improved. We've
It's
advanced,
accessible.
right? So
It's
I go,
accessible.
it takes hundreds of years to even understand horses to the point that we develop consistent, reliable training techniques. So if it takes you and your horse a month, I go, it's such a speck of time compared to what it really takes to have a dynamic relationship with a horse. I
I
go,
mean,
it,
I long lined my new guy for 4 months before I ever got on him
oh yeah. And I
because he was
go,
so dysfunctional. I thought, I can't ride that.
well, and Rarely Wrong, who I post her training videos on my YouTube channel with her liver issue and some of her physical issues, while we're doing antibiotics and deworming and all these things to try to get that liver issue turned around, I'm on month 7 of doing just walking circles on the long reins, only groundwork.
Right.
And she only just now, after 7 months, is starting to show more and more positive changes in her coordination. It's still difficult for her, but I
But
go,
it's herself. It's she is doing it. You're supporting her,
I'm
but you're
supporting her and guiding,
and
but
guiding, but
mhm,
you're not containing.
right.
Right. Big difference.
Right. And putting her on a lunge line was a disaster because she had
Too much
zero,
freedom.
too much freedom. She had
Too much
no
freedom.
self-control. So she couldn't calm down if I worked her on a lunge line or at Liberty and giving some touch, right? Kind of feeling there's a contact and then there's a little resistance or a lot of resistance, depending on what she's doing. That guidance helped her calm down
Figure it out.
because it was that sort of like the toddler thing they walk around in. She needed that support to start to find her feet, to start to feel what it's like to like a baby to be upright instead of crawling, right? And so, but I go, she might be only doing this exercise. We're at month 7, maybe a year, but as
Right.
long as her body is restoring, why not keep doing it?
Right.
Right? And I'll try riding at a certain point when she looks like she's getting the hang of things in her own body on the ground and the vet gives us a clean bill of health.
Right.
When those two things come together, I'll see what she has to say about being ridden. But I got no
Right.
idea. But she's exactly the kind of horse that if you put her even in stretchy rubber bands, it's like she has so many ways to be dysfunctional
Well,
that
we all do.
the odds of her figuring it out would just be minimal,
Right.
like the lottery. So we better wrap it up. We've been yapping for a while today. But thanks everybody for joining us. We hope you look through your tack room and
Have a gadget
maybe
sale.
not a gadget sale, like if you just look through your tack room and try to decipher, is this tool or gadget dynamic, which means it's between you and the horse. It depends on the feel, right?
Mhm.
Is it dynamically static like polo wraps or boots? Right?
Good
It's
point.
gonna cause a constant resistance of some type. Not good or bad. Is it just a constant resistance or a lot of
Right.
resistance? Or is it really zero resistance, which means it's gonna work proprioceptively? And we
And the
can,
same for you. Try some of those gadgets on yourself.
yeah.
See what you think.
Well, or even I've seen you tell people to put their hands where their hip joint is,
Yeah, just
or put their
proprioceptive.
hands like
Yeah,
on their scat on their
find it.
right
Yeah.
and feel it because even that
Even
self,
that type of proprioception is very informative.
right, right. All right, you guys. So have a little look through your tack room and just see if
Hmm.
you can tell the difference between dynamic tools and proprioceptive tools. And if you play with these elastic bands, which I think you're gonna do,
I bought some, I'll let you know.
okay. Um, again, how do they work is kind of the question that would be crossing my mind the most. And then I think it's really individual if they're going to help or
Mm,
hinder.
I agree.
I don't know that that's predictable just by strapping the bands on,
Exactly.
whether it's going to help or whether it's going to hinder.
I'll let you know.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And welcome
Thanks.
to all the new subscribers on
Oh,
YouTube. Thank
yay.
you very much. And all the downloads on the podcast platforms. It really encourages us a lot to keep going past, what are we, episode 188.
Yay.
Yay. So thanks everyone for your support, and we really appreciate it and hope you are gaining some changes from all this
Yes.
yapping we're doing. Okay.
See
Thanks
you next time.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.